Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out this morning. It's a gloomy day, so it's a good day to be inside. The object of today's webinar is to familiarize you with the different lineage societies that the Ohio Genealogical Society has. And we currently have 6 different lineage societies. Our first was First Families of Ohio, that was formed in 1964. That was well after the society founded in 1959. And this society will honor members who descended from pre-1821. The Society of Civil Wars Families was the second one formed, and that was formed in 1997 with Jocelyn Wilms as the first chair. Sunda Peters was the first chair of Settlers and Builders, a third lineage society, which started in 2003. And in 2009, Century Families of Ohio was formed, and I was the first chair for that. In 2016, the Society of Families of the Old Northwest Territory was formed by Eric Johnson as the chair. And in 2021, the Military Order of Daughters and Sons of Ohio was created by Eric Johnson, with the first awards being presented in 2022 with Tara Bentley as the chair. Each of these lineage societies honors Ohio ancestors in different time periods. And it's important to know that this covers a wide span of time. And for us to go into doing a lineage application is a major undertaking. I often get the statement that this is a daunting task. And yes, it is a daunting task. But if you are a good genealogist and you have good records, you will be able to do this without much difficulty. I'm not going to go too much into the pros and cons of actually applying for a lineage society in this webinar. And hopefully we will have others coming up that will do that for us. The first thing that you have to do is you have to go to the OGS website, ogs.org, go to the About, and then you want to click on Lineage Societies. When you do that, at the top of the page, it says Rules and Guidelines. And you want to read those rules and guidelines very carefully. Don't read them once. Don't read them twice. Read them at least 3 times through, because this is going to tell you exactly how you can prepare your application to be put in. And it does give you ideas and suggestions for the different lineage societies that we have. Submitting an application is one of the best things you will ever do for yourself, because it is something that, to me, it epitomizes the work that you have done to honor your ancestors by researching them and knowing your own family lines. There's nothing more self-satisfying than to know that you have done a job well done. What I want to do today is start with the military societies that we have. And the newest one is the Military Order of the Daughters and Sons of Ohio, or MODSO. And this one is open to any resident of the state of Ohio or direct descendants of any resident of the state of Ohio who served in the armed forces. This can even be yourself. If you were a member of the armed forces and you are an OGS member, yes, you can put yourself into this. This one covers most all conflicts of the United States up to current days. This one is also allowing collateral relatives, which could be uncles, aunts, nieces, nephews, siblings. The military lineage societies are the only 2 that allow collateral relatives. The others are strict bloodline. A collateral relative is a relative by bloodline, but not your direct line. And you'll find that explanation at the end of your handout for you. As long as that you can prove military service and where they were and everything else, then you are eligible for MODSO. You can put in more than one applicant at the same time. You can put in as many as you can cover on one application. It is not one person per application. So this one goes through there. Now, one of the things is, it's in our rules, it says applications must first be approved by the appropriate Lineage Society committee and then by the Ohio Genealogical Society's Board of Trustees. The lineage chair goes through the application and they approve or they ask for more information. When it has been totally approved by the chair at the March annual meeting, the rosters of the Lineage Societies go to the entire board for approval so that the certificates can be handed out at the conference that's coming up. So that is one of the steps that takes for us. If there's any questions on this one on MODSO, I think that this one is really one of the, it's one of the newest ones, but it's actually one of the ones that is probably fairly easy, especially if there's somebody that is close in your family, you could do this. I have a brother who was in the Air Force, but he lived out west and I'm back here in Ohio. I have very little information on what unit he was in, where he served. I know he was in Alaska, but I have very little. And until I can get any information on him, I can't put him in there. And I don't have a whole lot of military people that I can do that. The question was just asked, if you put more than one applicant on the application, is it $40 per person or per application? It is per application. It's $40 per application on your initial application. And you can put in as many people as you can prove on that one application. The Civil War families of Ohio is much the same. This one, you had to serve in the Civil War, but you could be Confederate or you could be Northern. It didn't matter. They must have served in the Confederate or in the Civil War at some capacity, but they must have lived in Ohio at some time. And it wasn't necessarily listed. You don't have to be an Ohio unit. If they served out of a Pennsylvania unit but moved to Ohio, then they would be considered as an example. This also takes squirrel hunters and spies. Males and females are both eligible for Civil War. Civil War has been one of the most elite, and that was the second Lineage Society that was formed by the Ohio Genealogical Society. And again, you have collateral relatives and you have your direct line ancestors. And again, the application fee is $40 for this one, with as many ancestors that you can prove on one application. Does anybody have any questions on the military applications or societies at this point?
Margaret, this does include the Revolutionary War, correct?
Yes, MODSO does. MODSO does the Revolutionary War, War of 1812, Indian Wars, most any war. There's a long list of battles or wars on the website that qualify for this Lineage Society. So again, you want to check to that.
And we had another person ask, is there a way to find out if some ancestors have already been recognized by another researcher? And if so, how to connect to that applicant's work?
For the most part, yes. I'm going to say yes. Most of the lineage societies are on the OGS website. First Families of Ohio has a very limited database up there right now, because that database is still a work in progress. And that is one of my jobs to finish that up. In the beginning, they created multiple databases. They created a separate database for the ancestors were going in, and then they created a separate database for the people who submitted them. And it was never put together. And that's my project, is to pull that all together. So it's a complete database. So you also know what file to go to at OGS to pull that information from. It can be done. Somebody's asking, is there a benefit to using more than one relative in a military application? That's entirely up to you. Who do you want to honor? Who do you want to give this distinction to? We've had people put in a whole family of brothers, or 6 or 8, or maybe whatever it is. It's really up to you how many you have that can go into one. And my personal theory is that if you're doing the work for one and you have more, do as many as you can for the $40 that you're spending, so you don't have to do a supplemental later or do something else. You can obtain military records in many different ways. Sometimes they've been handed down through the family. Online records for Civil War, we can now find. The pensions of 1812 are on fold 3. There's many different ways. There is also a researcher, Brian Reinhardt, who does Civil War research records in Washington, D.C. And he's very reasonable, and he costs less than ordering them through the records themselves directly through that benefit. So it's just, to me, the military ones are the ones that honor those people that have been in your life in the military. And it's another great way to preserve their history as well as for anything else. Is there a short form application for those already approved by other military societies, like Sons of the Union Veterans of the Civil War? No, there is not. And that's in the rules and the guidelines. In the rules and the guidelines, just because you've been accepted by another organization outside of OGS does not mean it's an automatic approval for you in OGS. You still have to complete the documentation. You still have to present all the material. And each lineage application at OGS is independent of the other one. So if you're filing for Civil War Families of Ohio, but you have somebody that you want to put in MODSO, which you can do both at the same time, actually, you have to present full documentation to both societies, because they are chaired by different people. There's no reference back and forth between each other. So you have to do the complete application. That's a very good question. Thank you. Is Ohio military men 1917 to 18 considered an acceptable source? I would think so, yes, because this would be around the time of, well, it would depend on if they actually served in the military. But that's something you can check with the rules and the guidelines. An ancestor registered in the 184th Ohio Infantry. He died at Camp Chase prior to being assigned to a company. Does he qualify? I would think he would, Laura, but again, check with the rules and check the request. Put your application in. If the chair feels that more information is needed, they will tell you. And Nancy's asking that her brother was in Vietnam, but not born or lived in Ohio. Our father, grandfather, and great-grandfathers were Ohioans. He would not qualify. If he did not live in Ohio himself at some point, he would not qualify. Then we have someone who served as a World War I nurse and served in France. As long as they lived in Ohio at some time, yes, they would qualify. If you ever have a question about qualification or anything that would go on, that you would have a question as with any of these, feel free to contact the chair of that particular society, and they will be glad to walk you through and answer your questions for you. We're here to help you just as much as we are to say you did a good job. We want to help you get that good job done for yourself. So we're going to go on to the regular lineage societies. And I'm going to start with century families here. The lineage societies basically go backwards in time. And the century families is open to direct descendants of any person residing in Ohio from 1861 to 100 years prior to the current year, which in the year 2023 would be 1923. So your person would have had to live in Ohio during or before the end of 1923 for century families. Keep in mind that if you're new to doing lineage societies, but these all interest you, and you still have someone that would qualify for first families or the families of the Old Northwest Territory, you have to go through all of the lineage societies to get back to the very, very early ones. Myself, when I did my own lineage societies, I started with first families and settlers. Century was not designed at that time, and I do not have military, so that was out for me. So I started with the early ones, first families and settlers, and then I was able to go back and do century families when that came along. However, for my husband, in doing his lines, I started with century families first, and once I got that approved, then I went to settlers and builders, and once we got those approved, we went to first families, and after that was approved, we went to Northwest Territory families. And in this sense, you have all your documentation from the previous years all together. You're just working on the next batch to get the next batch approved. You still have to submit everything in each case. You can't say, well, I was approved in century families last year, so now I could go into settlers. You still have to present all of your documentation that goes in with that. Again, this is a $40 fee. And again, this is a direct bloodline lineage society. This is not open to collateral relatives at all. Please excuse my voice. I've had bronchitis and sinus infection all week. Settlers and builders. This one is your direct descendants of any individual who settled in the area now encompassed by the state of Ohio between January 1st of 1821 and December 31st of 1860. And Settlers and Builders is a very interesting society because this is also encompassing a lot of Civil War people or pre-Civil War. And we have a lot of people that will do Settlers and Builders and Civil War at the same time. If you have people that qualify for century families and settlers of Ohio, put them in the best category that you can for that recognition. We don't want to cross, we don't want to cross people in these lineage societies unless it's absolutely necessary. When I did my husband's Settlers and Builders, he had one person, actually had two people that qualified for first families, but the only date that we could find was 1821 to put them in Ohio. So we did put those in Settlers and Builders first because we knew we were going to go and put them in first families. And in the case where you're not quite sure if you've got enough documentation to put them in the next group, put them in that one, and then the next year go ahead and put them in the other one. You can do all the lineage societies at one time if you decide you want to do that. It's not unheard of. Just don't put the same person in another group unless you're looking at the military lineage societies. The straight lineage societies, the bloodline lineage societies, and the military can be done at the same time. So, the First Families of Ohio goes from about 1788 to 1803, when Ohio became a state. If your person, your ancestor, was in Ohio prior to 1803, we also give out a small state of Ohio pin with 1803 that says that your ancestor was here before Ohio was a state. And this one is the one that I chair. This is the one that I like to work with. And this is the one, this is where your family came into Ohio, helped settle Ohio, helped make the towns, helped make the communities, helped make everything happen, started the politicians, brought in schooling, brought in medical, everything that happened. And what I like the most about working with First Families of Ohio is the fact that you can find out how many people actually came into this area, the trials and tribulations that they had coming into this area. And once in a while, I will find relatives, or I will find somebody who was a neighbor to my fourth great grandparents. So it's a very interesting program to work with. One of the cute little stories that I love to tell about First Families is a few years ago, we had an applicant, and her family had come down the Ohio River, and they were approaching Cincinnati, and there was a small island in the middle of the river. So they stopped on that island, and they ended up living there for about 6 or 8 years. And they lived on that island in a hollow tree. This hollow tree was large enough that that family of 8 could easily live in the hollow tree. And when they moved inland, they still had parts of their boat that they took and moved inland to help build their new home with. And when we were presenting the certificates that night, and I was telling the story of this family living in a hollow tree, and I said, but they didn't bake cookies. And it's a fun thing. We have to have fun with our genealogy as well as be serious about our genealogy. And I love the stories that we can tell about all of our people for what it is. Like I said, First Families of Ohio is probably it's the oldest lineage society, and it's probably the most prestigious lineage society that the Ohio Genealogical Society has. We've been told many times that many people will put their ancestors in First Families of Ohio before they do DAR because they want to make it sure that they have it right, which is a great compliment. The Society of the Families of the Old Northwest Territory is again open to direct descendants of any person who lived in the Old Northwest Territory prior to March 3rd of 1803, when Ohio became a state. Now, this can be for any person, if you're a descendant of any person who lived in what is now Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, or eastern Minnesota, east of the Mississippi River, between July 13th, 1787 and earlier, and May 7th of 1800 when Indiana Territory was created, or your ancestor lived in what is now Ohio or Michigan between the 13th of July of 1787 and March 3rd of 1803 when Ohio became a state. Or if your ancestor lived in what is now Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Eastern Mississippi, prior to the 13th of July, 1787, as a citizen of either France or Great Britain, or as a Native American. And sometimes we will find soldiers that are still there. SFON is open to OGS members, but this one is the only one that is also open to non-OGS members. OGS members pay a $40 application fee, and non-OGS members pay a $60 application fee. This one is very interesting, and to date has had very few applicants or applications come into this one. And we have many First Families of Ohio applications over the years that many of their people qualify for this group as well. My own fourth great-grandparents were in Ohio in 1795 in Steubenville. So when this society opened, I was able to also honor them in this one for the Old Northwest Territory, as well as First Families, but they'd already been in First Families too. So we were able to do that. And I think that's nice. And I think one of the nice things about lineage societies in general is the fact that you are honoring your family. And it doesn't matter if that family was wealthy, if they were of great prominence, if they were the governor of the state, whatever. Any of those individuals that actually came into Ohio in this time frame were pioneers, and they were explorers, and they were adventuresome, and they blazed many new trails for the state. They made our communities, they made our schools, they made everything happen. So even if they were farmers, yes, they're important. They're important to you, and they're important to everybody else just as much as anything is. The Lineage Societies of the Ohio Genealogical Society are some of the most prominent in the field. If you Google genealogy societies, you will get a whole list of many different kinds of both military, sometimes very specific. Of course, you have DAR, you have Sons of the American Revolution, you have the War of 1812, you have many, many well-known places that you can apply to. Remember that you have to read the rules in each one, because the rules and guidelines for each one are different. They are similar, but they are different. And if First Families of Ohio, if you've already been proven in DAR or one of the other organizations, even though you've done that, and you may submit a paper or two that says that you have done that, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to accept that as documentation that they were actually in Ohio at that time. In future programs, what we will do is we will discuss the type of documents that you need. We will discuss where to find those, how to put them together, and how to make an actual application. As an initial overview of all of the lineage societies that we have, I think it's important that you look through all of these and decide which one you want to try. And if there's something that you feel is not right about what you want to try, ask one of the chairs if you can get more input as to what would be acceptable and what you would need to help finish that all up for you. So are there any other questions now at this point that I can help you with?
Are we going to spend any time on the garden too? Yeah. Like New Testament archaeology?
Okay, Mr. Toller, do you have your microphone on, please?
I got a bunch of them from my brother-in-law.
Okay, one of the questions asked was, what are the guidelines for the use of published genealogies? Do they have to be published at a time when someone who would have personal knowledge of the cited generation still living, a child or a grandchild, must have been alive at the time when the genealogy was published, or could have provided personal knowledge of their parents or grandparents? DAR requires this for all published books. Published genealogies in and of themselves are taken on a case-by-case basis. It depends on when they were written and who wrote them out. A published biography in the county brag books, as they call them, different things like that, they can be used to prove a date of residency, but they cannot be used to use a proof of lineage. The exception to that is sometimes in those articles, you will find the maiden name of the mother, and that is the only place that you will find the maiden name of the mother is from that article, and that is acceptable. Generally, we do not need those published genealogies if you have done your documentation correctly. We're more to what I call the legal side of the documentation. We look for the birth, death, marriage, connecting everybody, and we can use wills and estates, but we do not have to necessarily have the biographies. I like the biographies because I like to read about that family and if they lived in a hollow tree or if they didn't live in a hollow tree. So I like to see those biographies and include them, or newspaper articles about the families. Oftentimes, I've seen newspaper articles where one of the children who's up in age has now told a story to the editor of the newspaper, and we have a nice story for that family. Another question is, I think I know the answers, but others may not. You do have to be a member of OGS to submit any applications. Yes, you do have to be a member. So it is $40 for your membership and $40 for the application. And that's for each application. That's initial applications. And we'll go over a couple other things in just a minute. Are anecdotal records published in annals acceptable for Northwest Territory Society? I would say probably yes, Jody, because I think that we need those tidbits to put into perspective the time frames and what it was. And I think that we had to have, again, newspaper articles, published articles, different things like that are good background for what these are. Okay, Diane Thomas is saying in 1984, we had a third great-grandfather approved for first families. His wife was not because her documentation was misspelled. Now I have better documentation. Was her application saved so I could just submit this new documentation? Yes, her application is indeed saved because with his application, all applications are filed and saved at the Ohio Genealogical Society in the archival room. So you could go back to that one. And what you might want to do yourself on this one, Diane, is to put the grandfather in and to put the grandmother in at the same time for yourself, because somebody else did it in 1984, not you. You can still put both of those people in and do that. And it's somebody had already had my fourth great grandparents in, but I had to go back and document everything because they never put my fourth great grandmother in. Even though they had her maiden name, they did not put her in. So if you've got the maiden name, then you've got everything. Spelling on a name to me does not really mean anything if it's close and it sounds close, because names were spelled differently and there was a different way to spell them. So that would be something worth pursuing. But I would also say, yes, Diane Thomas, put this application in because you can do that. Gail Swank asked if two people could go together and use the same application to apply for one person. No. Each person as an individual has to make an application. Now, the thing of it is, if you're sisters, and this is what happens, the one sister will put in the full documentation of everything. The second sister only has to do the application page and do the ascent chart as far as herself to connect to the parents and to the sister, and then say, see my sister's application. And I have a lot of people that do that for families. Joan McCready asked if you are a member of First Families of Ohio County Genealogical Societies. Are those records passed on to OGS, or would I have to apply to OGS First Families with those same ancestors? Joan, the answer is no, they are not passed on to OGS. They are retained locally, and you would have to apply to OGS First Families with those same ancestors. And I think that's also a conception that many people have, that you have to have the county ones may go up to the state. They do not. They stay at the local level. They don't go to the state. And Adrian is confirming that we are not supposed to submit the same ancestor for more than one lineage society. This is correct, unless it's a case where you're only doing one society per year. And the person that you're putting in, like I said, my husband's third great grandfather, we could put him in 1821 to put him in Settlers and Builders, but I didn't have enough information to get him into First Families. And I worked another year to get him into First Families. If you're close to that date, just look at your people and look at what you have for documentation. But the general rule is, yes, you do not put the same person into. Are there annual fees to maintain your membership in these societies? No, there are not annual fees. That's what I like about OGS as well. And how long does it take to have your application approved? This can vary between the different chairs. With First Families of Ohio, sometimes it can take several months, but I don't start judging until after conference is over. So if they come in between January and conference, they're set aside until after conference is over. But we try to get them all done as soon as we can. And it's one of those things that we try our best. I still have applications here for First Families for this year that I have to work on, and that's my goal before the end of the month, to get them up and get them out and get them done for what we're doing. I'd like to go back just for a moment, and at the very bottom of the handout, there's some terms that are used in Lineage Societies applications. The initial application is your first application to a Lineage Society. This application is the very first one that you're ever doing, and that's the important one. A supplemental application that you will see noted is an application made in a subsequent year after your initial application has been accepted. This is not an application for children or siblings. Each individual applying for a Lineage Society must first submit an initial application. The supplemental can be confusing, and sometimes when we're judging these applications, we may find another person that the person hasn't listed as an ancestor that qualifies, And they think that's a supplemental application. It is not a supplemental application if it's done in the same year. It's still part of the initial application. We talked about collateral relatives, and collateral relatives are allowed only in the military lineage societies. And the definition of a collateral relative is any blood relative who is not your direct ancestor. Your ancestors are your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, and your collateral relatives would be cousins, nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles, siblings, and etc. Source citations. If you're not familiar with source citations, please look that up. It's basically a who, what, when, and where of the document you are submitting. And I want you to look at the rules and guidelines again on the OGS webpage for rules and guidelines, because I think that this is one of the things that we're very lax on today. Even though it says we need source citations, many people do not add the source citation to their documentation. The source citations can go on the document themselves, or they could go on the documentation list as to what that source is. Lily has provided the link again for the handout in the chat box. And Adrian is asking how the private information contained in the applications is secured. My main hesitation in joining any of the Ohio Lineage Societies is my concern of privacy and security of all my personal information. Turning in copies of living people's birth, marriage, etc. certificates has a liability for being misused, stolen, and identities, etc. And I will simply address it this way, Adrian. We have never found a case of identity fraud from a lineage application that's on file. The files are kept in an archival locked room. The public does not have general access to the archive room. If somebody comes in and wants to look at that application, the volunteer on duty will pull that application. They count the pages before and after it's been looked at, so they know that the application stays intact. Your private information is out there. Anybody can find you on the internet. It is not private. We like to think it has a privacy to it, but it basically does not. And if you're very, very concerned about that, then I would suggest that you do not go for the lineage applications. But in my own experience and the experience of other lineage chairs that we have had, and we've had this discussion before, it does not come from a lineage application for identity fraud. Identity fraud will most likely come from a member of your family, or in a case where your information is stolen from your purse or your pocket. So thank you for that question, because that is another very big question. That is a very big concern for a lot of people. And we see that an awful lot. Ross says 2 family members were accepted on FFO on the same application, father and son. I've been told that I will receive a certificate and 1 PIN at April's conference. How do I obtain a second PIN for the approved son? The PINs are not for the ancestors that are approved. The PINs are for the applicant. So as you are the applicant, you are the ones that will receive the PINs. It's not the ancestors that receive them. So I hope that clears that up for you, Ross. Joan asks again, if a document has the person's social security number included, is it acceptable to cover that number on the copy of the document? Absolutely, yes. I encourage that. Please do. We do not take the time to do that, but you can do that. And I think that's a very good thing to do. Sometimes even on a death certificate, people may not want anybody else to know the cause of death. Sometimes that's crossed out. But anything that's pertinent to the application must remain visible. But a social security number is not pertinent to the application at all. So do we have any other questions here? We've had 64 of you here today. I am thrilled. I am absolutely over the moon with that. Lily, do you have another announcement to make?
Well, Margaret, yes, I do. There's so much to cover in what Margaret has to say. She has actually started to break it up, and there are 2 more scheduled Lineage Society webinars, one for February 29th and one for February 23rd. And if you go to our events page on ogs.org, you can sign up there now. They are up there as of about an hour ago. And it goes into some more specific detail on, and Margaret, you can elaborate on this, what you need to do to start preparing your application and finalizing your application and turning it in, and a lot more of the detail.
The seminars are going to be on the 9th and the 23rd.
What did I say? I'm sorry.
You said the 23rd and 29th.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You were close.
Numbers were never my thing.
The next one is going to be, how do I gather my documents? How do I start? Where do I start? What do I need to find? How do I find it? It will be a lot of clues on getting the documentation that you need for the lineage application itself. We do focus on OGS, but again, and most of this is good for any lineage society that you want to join. It's that specific that it can help you do that. The second seminar in February will be on putting it all together. And that is where a lot of people have the questions, is I have everything that I need. Now, how do I put it together? So we're breaking this up into 2 different sessions instead of making it one great big long one. So we're kind of looking forward to that. Now, Lily at the very beginning asked me 2 questions. She asked me who my favorite ancestor was and why that I put into a lineage society. And that is really a hard one, because all of my ancestors to me were important, because I didn't find my ancestors till much later in life. And to know that I had a very large family was a little overpowering to me instead of a very small family. But I think probably one of the most favorite persons that I put into a lineage society was my mother into Century Families of Ohio. She was born in 1920 and she passed away in 1999. And I was able to get my mother into Century Families of Ohio, and also my father. But I think my mother was probably one of the favorite ones that I had to do that. Who was the hardest one? Well, this was a 4th great grandfather that lived in Jefferson County in 1795. He was an early settler. And the reason he was not accepted the first go around was because in his estate papers and will papers, it listed his heirs at law. It did not say my sons and daughters. And the chair at that time said that heirs at law did not prove that it was a child of his. Technically, it does. So I had to wait several years to resubmit him and get him in. So he took me quite a little bit of work to get him in to First Families of Ohio. My husband's family was probably one of my biggest challenges because some of his lines just went everywhere. My line was more direct. My dad's parents were third cousins. So that family line intertwined all the way back to my fourth great grandparents on both sides. And so mine was quite easy. And my husband had all of those that kept multiplying out. So his was harder than mine was. But those are good questions, Lily. Thank you. You're muted.
Well, if anybody else has any more questions, we've got just a couple of minutes. But otherwise, Margaret, thank you for a wonderful presentation. OGS has just started doing a series of more webinars to be able to present on our website, and we appreciate everyone's contributions and participation, and we welcome you to go to ogs.org and check it out. So,
and if you haven't started a lineage application, start thinking about it, because I think that this is a true test of what we do as genealogists and how we can put all of our work together and make it last for posterity. We're writing that book. Thanks, Lily. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Margaret. Thanks, everyone, for coming. We appreciate everybody's participation.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time today.
All right. We look forward to seeing everybody at the next one.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.